Welcome back. Well, today we are back on our airport plan, our disaster preparedness plan, airport, AIRPORT, assessment, inventory, resources, planning, organization, review, and testing. And today we are on R for resources. So we'll talk about that when we get back. Before we get started, I went around and took a look at the necklaces that Randy has made. Remember, these were the bits of shattered rose medallion china from the schoolhouse when the roof collapsed. These were the pieces that were just not salvageable, and Randy has taken them and made jewelry from them. They will be future giveaways, and I'm trying to show off every piece, but there are so many of them that I'm starting to forget which ones I have shown you and which ones I haven't. So I'm hoping this is one I haven't shown you yet. Okay. Today, resources. Now, the first two stages of our plan was assessment, and that was determining what our situation was. What are our liabilities? What do we have to be mindful of if a disaster strikes? And the second one was inventory. What do we have, either physically or in the space between our ears, that are going to help us cope with that disaster? Well, resources is the third part of that. It's like a mathematical equation. The assessment showed us the whole picture, the final number. The inventory showed us what we have already that will help us get to that final number. And resources is the next part of the equation, what we have to add to our inventory to take us up to that point where we meet our assessment needs. So, for those of you who are mathematically minded, or if you like things in fixed black and white terms, we're going to say that our assessment is a 10. Whatever our circumstances are, it's 10. And our inventory shows us how close we are to 10. And our resources is the difference between whatever our inventory was and what we need to hit that 10 mark. So, what are your resources? Well, for starters, it's the obvious. It's family, it's friends, it's money. If you have cash in your hand, in your pocket, it's part of your inventory. But if your cash is somewhere else, if it's in savings accounts in the bank, if it's not right in your hands right now, it's a resource, not part of your inventory. It can become part of your inventory, maybe. I don't know about the rest of you, but my bank is closed today. It was open when I was there last week, but sometime between last Wednesday and this Wednesday, closed. So the money I have in my bank is a resource because it's not in my hands right now, but I can get it. I can obtain that. It's like your family and your friends coming to help you out if you need it. It's there. It's available. It's a resource for you. Now, we started off by talking about some specific examples, and I was using Jocelyn's family, and hers is a good one for resources, because when we talked about her assessment, well, she has 2 small children, 3 adults, everybody has medical issues, 4 birds, it's a lot of pluses, but a lot of minuses too. When we spoke about inventory, we spoke about the fact that 3 of the 5 people in her family are adults, and they have driver's licenses. There are a couple of cars, 2 cars, I think, 3 drivers. That's part of the inventory. She also has family nearby. She has 2 parents, so bang, 2 more people in her inventory. She has a sister, the sister's husband. She has a brother, the brother's fiance. 6 more licensed drivers, whoopee. And at least 6 more cars. Big, big plus, given the fact that she might have to evacuate 2 small children. So 2 children, 3 adults, 4 birds. I'm sorry, I almost said 2 birds. 4 birds, and only 2 cars, and only one of them is an SUV. The other is a sports car. So, at that point, she's probably going to want to pull in mom and dad and get access to their vehicles. And of course, she will probably be a resource to some of them. And that's how it works. The people for whom you are a resource are probably people who are resources to you. It's a reciprocal thing. Now, I do not have family in the area. On one hand, that's very good because I don't have to worry about digging an elderly parent out of an apartment they don't want to leave. I don't have to argue, with my family, everything's an argument. As you say good morning, and it's like, don't tell me what to do. So I don't have to deal with that. I just have to take a photobomb kitty, cram him into a carrier, kicking and screaming, cram the carrier into a backpack, and if I have to evacuate, I go. My resource is I have 2 motels in the area that I can walk to. And because, as I mentioned, you have to consider your most likely local conditions. For me, it's flooding. South central Pennsylvania, we could get hurricanes. Even with hurricanes, flooding is still an issue. And flooding tends to be a problem in this area. So 2 motels in walking distance. The motel to the south is 1.5 miles away. I could walk that in half an hour, even with a screaming cat in my backpack. The one that is to the north is 3 miles away. I could walk that in an hour, maybe an hour and 10 minutes, because cat would be screaming. But that one is on very high ground. It's raised up, good heavens, it's got to be 50 or 60 feet above street level. And I have a friend who lives there. So my first resource is not the obvious. It's not the motel that's 1.5 miles away. My first resource is the one that is 3 miles away because it's much higher ground. And my friend Morag, the hotel has apartments as well. My friend Morag is there, and she's a resource for me. Great. So that's how you need to think. It's not just people. Remember, I don't drive, so my resource is the county transportation department. It's the city buses. It's the train station in Harrisburg. And I get to Amtrak. I can go anywhere. Those are the resources. Now, we briefly touched on money, and as I say, my bank is closed. I have my ATM cards, and there are machines, ATMs all over the place. But that's not necessarily going to be something that would be available to me in a hurricane. Power may go out. The machines need power in order to run. So you stick your card in an ATM, and if there's no power, you don't get money. If I stick my cat in the carrier, take a walk up to that high ground motel, and they don't have power, they can't access my cards, they can't get paid. So cash becomes an issue. Now, for those of you who have watched Crazy Lamp Lady, you probably already know I keep a stash of cash in the case of my cell phone. And we've done that. Joss has always said, do you have your telephone money? Yes, I do, because we've gone into places where we need cash. They don't take cards. And I have my telephone money always. So I am in the habit, which goes back to, oh, this is awful, but this goes back to the good old days. I will date myself. When I would go out on dates with guys, and my mother would always say, you had better bring $5 so if he gets fresh, you can take a taxi home. Now, I know, that is just like so 1950s or 60s, you know. But yeah, good habit my mother got me into. I always carry cash. It's no longer $5. Inflation has changed that. But I certainly carry enough cash so I can get myself a motel room for the night. That's part of my inventory, not part of my resources. Because right now, that resource, that bank that can give me cash, is closed. And in a lot of disaster situations, I might not even be able to access my money just because the power might be down. So this is when we start to look at how many of those resources we want to convert to inventory. In most cases, it's probably a very good idea to keep some cash around. You don't want to keep a great deal of cash. Of course, you don't want to make yourself a target for criminals or anything like that. It's not like you want to run around with a suitcase full of $20 bills. But some cash on hand in case of emergencies is always a good idea. So my resources are essentially public resources, public transportation, a motel, whatever. But they're there for me. Jocelyn's resources are much more likely to be personal resources, friends and family. And I have that too because I have neighbors, and my neighbors all drive. And, if I were in a gym, I would go knock on a neighbor's door and they would say, of course, we'll take you somewhere. I don't live among barbarians. But those are the things you need to look at. Now, you notice in resources, I didn't list my veterinarian for the purpose of boarding the photobomb kitty, because that's not going to happen. And that's something that those of you who have animals need to consider. Sometimes people think, well, in the event of an emergency, if we have a massive storm, if we have a hurricane, if we have flooding, I'll just board the pets and then I'll go. Bad idea. First of all, most boarding facilities do not have staff on the premises 24 hours a day. Even at my veterinarians, they don't have staff on the premises 24 hours a day. And if there's no one there with your animals and the situation where they are worsens, what happens to your animals? What if they're there, if the staff is present and the situation worsens? At this point, your 2 dogs or your cat or whatever is suddenly one of maybe 15 or 20 animals that have to be evacuated, which could be beyond the resources of the staff. So the idea of boarding your animals is probably simply not a good one. Now, if you can evacuate your animal from the disaster area and board them somewhere safe, yes, of course, it's an option. But boarding your animal in the area you intend to evacuate could be tantamount to just leaving your animal at home on their own, left to their own devices. Now, my photobomb kitty, who is jingling in the background in case you haven't heard him, here we go. He'll be coming. He can very easily be left to his own devices. Believe me, he can survive a war. That is one street smart cat. Still coming with me no matter what. So when you start to look at your options, like the resources for your animals, and this is the same thing is true for your elderly relatives, in some cases, it might be a very good idea if you have to evacuate to get them to a hospital, somewhere their needs can be met. Because whereas people might wander off from an animal boarding facility, nobody ever wanders off and leaves hospital patients behind. It's a resource. I'm not saying this is a first-line resource. I don't think leaving grandma at the hospital and evacuating the rest of the family is going to be anybody's first choice. But in a dire emergency, it might be your only option. So consider that and make sure you are aware of the situation of all of your hospitals. How many beds do they have? Do they operate at or near capacity, or are they operating well below capacity, so that if in fact your only possible choice was to bring grandma to the hospital and evacuate the rest of the family, that it would be an option? And like I say, I don't think that would be anybody's first choice, but in a life or death emergency, it might in fact be the only choice available to you. So make sure you know what the situation is. Obviously, if you have a hospital nearby that is customarily operating at or near capacity, it's not going to be an option. You may need to look to outlying areas and see if there are other hospitals that are operating a little below capacity so that they would have a bed and be able to take your relative. So, something to think about. And remember, when we start looking at resources, we're lining up the resources that can help us. We are looking at worst case scenario and what happens if. So, we keep that in mind. Now, our greatest resource, of course, is the information from the internet. And that's where we can supplement the skills we already have. And when we talk about things like sheltering in place, going for a week or two with just the food we have in our homes, the internet is going to be where we are going to acquire the necessary skills to do the home canning, to come up with, well, actually, yes, of course, because it's YouTube. We've already come up with some great, I hope you all saw the recipes that showed up yesterday in the comment sections. Great, cheap, easy recipes. You know, we're working on this right now. And so, in that sense, our YouTube community are resources for us. They certainly were in yesterday's video, giving us options for food storage. This is a resource, and we need to access all the resources available to us. So take a look, and if you need information, now is the time to start looking around for where you will be able to locate that information. I think, frankly, by the time this mess is all over, most of us are probably going to make sure we have at least 2 or 3 weeks worth of food for our entire family somewhere. And our resources for that are things like, you know, the brother-in-law who can put up the shelves in the basement where you can store a few extra cans or a few jars. Remember, that's a resource too. So when we start looking at resources, it's everybody and everything that can fill in the gaps for us. A lot of people, by the way, had spoken or left comments about having a go bag for evacuation. By the way, it's a remarkably clever idea. My go bag, as you know, I have a backpack and a cat carrier, and it's an airline cat carrier, the kind that slides under the seat. I have bigger cat carriers too, but the airline carrier is the one that will fit into my backpack. It's the one the cat will hate because, you know, he's not going to have a lot of room to move in that, but it will enable me to get him out of here. Do you have a go bag? And I think we should all really look at that, because remember, as I said before, evacuation might not be a choice, just as sheltering in place might not be a choice. These are things that may be forced upon us. We're all sheltering in place now, whether we like it or not, and I'm sure some of us are saying, gee, if I had known this, I would rather evacuate. I would rather go up, to my relatives in North Dakota where they're not on lockdown. And by the way, I don't know if North Dakota is on lockdown. I think North Dakota is probably always on lockdown. I mean, my goodness, we've got a sparsely populated state there. I think they're used to sort of sheltering in place. So the resource section is where we're going to find the things we need but don't already have. We don't necessarily need to put them in our pockets. For me, it's a motel. I'm certainly not putting a motel in my pocket, but it's a resource that's available to me. My cell phone has Uber and Lyft apps. I have the number of the local cab company. And my desk drawer, I have a bus schedule for the city buses. And I'm going to get an Amtrak schedule too, which I don't have. That'll be a resource as well. So these are the things we need. But the Amtrak train is not going to be in my back pocket. It's not going to be my inventory. It's going to be my resource. Oh, and when we spoke about having driver's licenses, some of you have driver's licenses and don't have cars. Your resource is your nearest car rental agency. There you go. And if you look to evacuate early enough in a disaster, you are probably still going to be able to easily rent a car. All you need is a driver's license and a credit card and, go to town. So this is sort of the extra, the outer envelope of our inventory, the stuff we don't have, but we have access to. All right. Now, I think tomorrow we're just going to sit in the kitchen, have a cup of coffee, and talk about what's going on around us. Because I ran into an interesting situation today. Thought I would share it with you before we sign off. I was at physical therapy because I am still able to go out for my medical appointments. And I was standing outside. I had arrived early. I was standing outside, and a presumably homeless person came by with that COVID-19 cough. If you've ever heard it, you won't mistake it. It's a sort of dry, hacking cough. He just couldn't stop. And I thought to myself, it's a very good chance this person has the coronavirus, wandering the streets. But as I say, from the looks of him, he was probably homeless. And that got me to wondering about what the resources are for people who don't have any resources at the best of times. I don't know what my own community is doing in terms of providing testing and medical care for people who have fallen through the cracks of the system. And because a lot of people who are homeless have mental health issues, who knows if they would even be willing to accept treatment? And, you just don't know. So I thought it's one of the things we might want to talk about, just what's going on around us, what we've noticed. But in any case, I think tomorrow we're just going to sit down at the kitchen table, have a cup of coffee, and chat, just like friends, because I don't know about you folks, but I am really missing that. One of the things about being on lockdown like this is you don't get to sit with your friends and have a cup of coffee. You don't get to go out to lunch. You don't. This is not normal. This is not normal life. We are all in a state of social isolation. Now, I can't complain about my situation. As I say, I'm still getting out. I'm still seeing people. But I know a lot of you are not. A lot of you are at home alone, and I'm starting to get a little worried about the emotional and psychological implications for people who are facing enforced solitude. It's not psychologically healthy. So we're going to have to find a way to sort of reach out. I'm glad we have our YouTube channel. I'm glad we have such a great little community, because at the very least, even though we can't sit down and talk to one another, we can at least pick up our cell phones or our computers or our iPads or whatever and write comments, and there is some back and forth connection. But I think we're going to have to take a look at strengthening that, because if we are in this situation for much longer, we are going to find people having serious cabin fever. So let's see if we can do something about that. Okay, meantime, the comments are here. The comments are for you. Reach out if you are alone and you are lonely and you are going stir crazy. Remember, the comments are for you. Just talk about it. And just stay safe. Take care. We are going to get through this. We're going to get through this together. Okay? Now, I will see you all tomorrow, and I am going to find something cute to tag on the end of this to keep our spirits up. I don't know what. Maybe I'll just try shoving the cat in a carrier, and we could all laugh about that for a while. But I'll give you a cute little couple of minute video at the end of this, just so we can guarantee that we end on a happy and upbeat note. I will see you all tomorrow. Meantime, take care of yourselves.